Hello, everyone with the California Master Beekeeper Program. Today we have a special treat, Mr. Rick Boone. He's a resident of Orange County, will be presenting his master level capstone on adding a beekeeping program to California community colleges. So we're pretty excited about this. Take it away, Rick. Welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. And for those who are watching the recording too, and Alina, thanks for making the time. Glad to present with you. And just a little bit of quick background. My name is Rick Boone. I teach at Irvine Valley College. I oversee the real estate program there and also teach business classes. Have only been in education formally for about 7 or 8 years, and overlapping that the last several years have enjoyed backyard beekeeping. And so that's really what that first swarm that came into my front yard is what sparked my interest. Started with a local club and started seeking out more formal education for consistency and for a number of other reasons, and found the camp program. So overlapping, family and professional work life, and add bees into the mix. And that's what brought me here to this master level. At Irvine Valley College, I also happen to be the current curriculum chair for the last 5 years, which has also helped me really understand process a lot better, both at the local college level and statewide. And again, overlapping that with the beekeeping piece, this is kind of where I come to this presentation. So we're looking at adding a program to the California community colleges. Real quick overview of our agenda for the presentation. We'll look at some goals that I kind of set out to meet. Looking at also the beekeeping curriculum, kind of more specifically, what's actually in the courses, what type of funding is available and needed at the colleges, potential apiary locations, what marketing is needed or desired, I guess, maybe. And just a quick overview, kind of some timelines, costs, and hours that have gone into the project. Feel free to interrupt too if you have questions along the way. I don't mind that at all. So first off, for the goals, I wanted to identify a process for adding new programs. Every community colleges, every college university has to deal with this. How do we add new stuff? But it's not often a very clear process. It can be very convoluted, and there's a lot of different pieces and people that are involved in that. Looking at course structure and how we wanted to do that at the college, what kind of information would go into each course, and then therefore which courses would go into which certificates, which is kind of the goal or the overview, the organizational structure of the courses at the campus. And of course, wanting to partner with camp in all of this work and benefit both institutions. Identify local college and state requirements, I already mentioned. The apiary location's an interesting one, whether to build or to borrow, and how to collaborate and market a new educational program. So first off, I started on this little journey with a survey. I created a survey monkey and sent it out to whoever I could who knew about beekeeping. I think there's 3 or 4 local clubs, even down south of me towards San Diego, had a couple of club presidents that were willing to send this out. In the survey, I actually asked you, like, how far would you be willing to travel to take a class? But this is one of the great ones. I had 50 people respond, which right off the bat, I was like amazed that many people would actually even respond. And you can see the vast majority said that they were interested in this. So I've been able to refer back to this survey. Any data, of course, when you're looking to add a program or you're involving, hierarchies of bureaucracy, it's always helpful to have numbers and to be able to refer back and say, here's what the information I have. It's not all inclusive, but it's good information. So looking at adding a program in the community college system, and maybe this is the broad issue with education as well, it's often a situation of having to show that there's a need for a thing, right? And so we can't go to the higher ups and say, hey, I want to start a beekeeping program. Give me some money. Let's hire some people and let's get going. Buying equipment, we're talking about, thousands, tens of thousands. If it's staff, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so oftentimes you have to kind of build it for them to be able to support it. And so the idea that I can't just take data to the table and say, I want to add a beekeeping program. I had to start kind of from the ground up and really dedicate my time. And I'll hit this later on, but the idea of having somebody championing the effort to be able to really, hold the torch. I'm using a ton of different references here to move it forward. One of the issues I saw right off was this idea of like, hey, I want to start a beekeeping program. Does it have to be new and separate in and of itself, or can it live under another program? One of the challenges that I, again, first off, saw that with a new program, accreditation is involved, and there has to be a change report sent to accreditation whenever you're going to start something new outside of the existing structure. And so that was a huge red flag right off the bat. This paperwork and effort to try to add something for accreditation's sake, and then maybe it fails. I mean, maybe enrollment's not there, maybe the students don't come, is a lot of effort and money up front for nothing. So it was decided to move forward under the closest, and for me, where I had some contact already, the closest related department was biology at my college. Depending on the college, there's a lot of different programs that you might live that under, but basically to avoid that substantive change report going to accreditation, we kind of launched or started the work under the bio department. One of the benefits of this is that the structure's already there. There's a hierarchy there. You're not having to create the whole wheel from scratch. But the challenges with that is that I am now working as a subject matter expert in beekeeping and working with an existing chair over a department, an existing dean over that department, who I haven't actually worked with before, that dean. And so you have this whole other structure in place that's a little bit outside of my norm personally. And it's just was so important, obviously, to have collaboration. Very easily, even though it's a colleague of mine in the bio department, she could have said, yeah, we really don't want to do this right now. And that would have squashed the whole project right off the bat. So collaboration is huge from the ground up. And so even when working on these courses and submitting these courses into our local system before taking it up to the next levels, it has to live under some sort of existing hierarchy. And so that connection has to exist. After that local level, thinking ahead, and where some issues and questions came up is that if I'm living under the bio department, will a beekeeping faculty teaching a beekeeping class be able to teach a biology class? Do they meet the minimum qualifications for that class? If I'm under the bio department, is that going to cause issues down the line? Or vice versa? Would a bio faculty have the ability to teach a beekeeping class because they're already approved as a bio instructor? And so we had to look at state minimum qualifications. I'm sure there are for other systems this exists, but for us, it's under the California Community College Chancellor's Office. This is a published document. I actually have a screenshot in a minute to show that. But anyhow, this was some of the questions and concerns that came up right off the bat too. As we're inputting these courses and filling in all the blanks, these questions are kind of all addressed. Lecture units versus looking at classroom activities like a lecture. Obviously, we think of beekeeping as pretty hands-on, but there's quite a bit of instruction that happens too, and we've seen that through camp and the online classes. Well, this has a certain ratio when you're doing the math, when you're submitting hours in units to account for those hours. There's also lab units. So thinking about actually doing something, being at an apiary doing that work, the hours are calculated differently. So if we have a 2-unit class that's lecture, that's the equivalent of basically 2 hours of instruction in 1 week of the semester. When you're looking at a lab unit, that one lab unit is accounting for 3 hours in this case in the apiary. So having to try to navigate that and figure out what would work practically speaking, how many students would fit in each class or each round in the apiary. A lot of factors come into that. And then also certain standards at the college. At our college, we do actually have half units, but we don't have quarter units. So when we're doing the practical math of how many hours do we need to be in the apiary, how many students can we have in the apiary over what window of time, thinking about safety equipment and all that other stuff, how many hours does that give us into that unit calculation? And if we're limited to half units or whole units even, it can make it a little complicated. I loved the idea. In my own personal program, I run all of my classes on 8-week sections as opposed to the full semester term, which is usually 16 to 17 weeks. And I loved that idea for the beekeeping program because of the ability to offer shorter commitments for students coming in, and also to address seasonal needs as we have different, changes in the season. Coming into a typical, fall semester, that spans, leaving summer and at the other end of the spectrum, in winter. So how do we adjust for that in one class? And so I had planned on doing an 8-week scheduled classes. And then also just to note that scheduling is separate from the actual curriculum and the content and the process. So there's a little bit different, norms or process that might be set up on each campus. Credit versus non-credit. Pretty quickly, I felt like the credit route would be limiting for students coming into this type of program, primarily because when you enter into a credit program at a college, you have to go through a full application process. If your goal is maybe professional development as a student, maybe you don't have to go through math assessments and reading and writing assessments and those kind of things. But the credit system does have limitations. And one of those big ones is that you can only take one class one time. And so I wanted to look at the non-credit program. Excuse my dog. The non-credit program. I don't know what you can hear around me. The roofers, the dog. Looking at non-credit, there's a lot more flexibility. One of the big benefits is that students can take those classes over and over again. And so whether you're taking it, a year apart or semester after semester, I felt like this gave a lot of opportunity for students and for the program to be able to build in solid enrollment. One of the other great things at community colleges right now, and it's been for the last several years, and there's no anticipation of it going away, though we never know, that non-credit right now is free for students. So they can sign up, take the class, and there's no cost out of pocket for them to take the class. And so we have, personally at our college at Irvine Valley, we have quite a big English learning adult ESL program that are constantly looking for different ways to improve their English, but also learn job skills. And we also have an emeritus population, which focuses on older adults. And I felt like both of these would benefit, this beekeeping non-credit program. There's one other indication too, that again, this may change in the future, but California Community Colleges has this enhanced funding for non-credit. So if it meets certain criteria, it's still free to the student, but the college actually gets paid more and gets paid the equivalent of a credit course. So thinking ahead, I could see an administrator or again, with the bureaucracy involved, maybe there's a little bit more buy-in if you can show that this program would be able to pay the college basically dollar for dollar as it would a credit class. The only way to do that with beekeeping would be to have it approved as short-term vocational. And I can talk a little bit about that in a little bit, but the idea that taking these classes will lead to a job, and not just that, but that those jobs exist regionally. And so I'll mention a little hiccup and some challenges that we had further along, but the idea of enhanced funding, you could go non-credit. We could focus on a couple different things for beekeeping to live at non-credit. This is after the project now. I'm kind of giving you some highlights and some ways things might be different. Probably most successfully petitioned or submitted as emeritus. So focusing on older adult populations and how this program can help older adults. Because beekeeping, agriculture is not one of the 10 specified non-credit areas. Short-term voc is the only way to go enhanced funding on its own as beekeeping. And if not that, then it would have to be the emeritus focus, I believe, for course approval at the state level. All right, moving along. I know there's a lot of stuff right there. So I mentioned minimum qualifications for faculty. Just to show you the difference, the beekeeping there is highlighted under agriculture. So if there was a program specific to beekeeping and a top code, a coding at the state level regarding beekeeping, what would be required is any degree in professional experience to be qualified to teach that. If we code that class as a biology class, if it's a credit biology class that's called beekeeping, now we have a different story. You have to have a master's in biology to teach that class. So just to show you kind of the difference between how that hierarchy can affect the adding of these types of courses and certificates. Looking at the curriculum itself, the actual content of the courses, again, department structure comes into play here. If we want to tie these courses into other programs like biology, biology also at one point kind of looked at my content and said, hey, we don't know if this is sciencey enough. I was like, well, it's not a biology class. It's coded under biology, but it's a beekeeping class. And so, or maybe the flip, we want less of a certain thing in certain content. So again, this connection to the departments is pretty important, can have a big impact on the success of adding the courses and program. I mentioned this a little bit already, but the idea that, there's a subject matter expert. In this example, it's me coming in with the beekeeping experience, but then there's this department chair that oversees the department, the hierarchy structure of the program. And again, some of these other sub points I just mentioned regarding the minimum qualifications, the program director versus the teacher, and those things. Again, kind of a repeat a little bit there. Collaboration is important with the administrative stakeholders as well. I mentioned the importance of data and research. Initially, when I submitted these as non-credit, as short-term vocational, I had to show the connection to jobs, which I think I was able to do in the content. Later on, it was discovered, because we haven't done this at my college before, the enhanced funding for short-term vocational programs. It was discovered that the state did want data, and specifically regional data, which I can show you a brief overview of in a minute. Another way to do this, though, could be employer surveys. It could be showing some sort of community needs. But for this specific type of classification, the state needs to see hard numbers, which can be a challenge, especially in Orange County, where agriculture is not huge here. Even when there's people traveling from nationwide, right, to go into California, regionally in California, there's challenges with data. Curriculum catalog timelines. Our curriculum process runs really efficiently. We have an amazing chair. Sorry, I mentioned I was the chair already. So our process actually works really efficiently at our campus, and from submittal to the next steps basically is like a 2-month-ish window. However, a lot of those timelines of curriculum and when you can actually offer a course are dependent on the district and dependent on the state and the catalog, which is kind of the formal publication of the information. Some colleges run that only once a year. We happen to run it twice a year, which gives you basically 2 entry points into the catalog to then trickle down, get it onto the schedule for the following semester. Also, when this is going through, when we're creating this and when it's going into the catalog, being mindful of how the courses and the certificates work together, what the certificate itself can be approved for, as I mentioned, short-term voc, emeritus, how that shows up in the catalog, all questions that are involved in this bullet. Separate from the content, then we have the actual apiary itself, and whether it should be on campus or off campus. I have a couple maps and a couple things to note in just a minute in this conversation, which really went back and forth to, yes, we can do it. No, we can't do it. We might be able to do it, but over there, no, not there. How about option 2? And so to avoid basically a year-long conversation with potential apiary locations and liability concerns and how it would affect the district's insurance policies and all that stuff, we landed on the idea of being able to partner with a local apiary. Thankfully, camp has the South Coast Research Center in Irvine, which is not too far away from the campus, which is a huge benefit moving forward. I also, just to mention, basically with this potential partnership and apiary location, but also just for general marketing, to be in good graces and collaborate with local clubs, colleges, universities. These are all potential students. Through a lot of these conversations, I found out that UC Riverside, which is not close to us, but it's drivable, maybe 30-40 minute drive, that they have credit. They do have a credit beekeeping class that is filled up every semester. And they have so many students that will want to take the class, but they're limited by budget or schedule or other issues. They don't have anywhere to send those students that are interested in beekeeping outside of maybe camp program. And so if a student wants to go and be hands-on and wants to kind of learn some ins and outs, but maybe not jump into a full, year-long program, there's limited options for that. So this type of collaboration really uncovered, some problem solving on content and structure of the courses and certificates, but also potential for future students too. Here's a snapshot of how we decided to organize the courses and the certificates. So basically, you can write one course and it can be standalone, quote unquote, is what they call it. But the certificate is what has to get approved at the state. And this involves the funding. it being enhanced or not, or the approval of it being non-credit or not. So here's how we structured it. We focused on the kind of the entry, called it the beekeeping assistant. And this was ironic because this is before the new camp lower level, if you will. We kind of structured this before that was launched. So the beekeeping assistant certificate involves basically in classroom only, maybe an apiary visit, but it's not hands-on with the bees. So these are basically lecture classes involving maybe some class projects like putting together woodenware, cleaning, painting, that kind of stuff. We wanted to build into the program the idea that the students taking a class and they're learning, but they're also helping with the management of the apiary. The second certificate, looking at the beekeeping worker, this one is focused more hands-on and would have those lab hours, as we discussed already, with students being in the apiary. Again, with these being non-credit, the huge benefit, students can take these over and over again. And it's no cost out of pocket. It's just a huge benefit. As they went forward, got published in the catalog. Again, you can see the classes, basically what I just explained was kind of my easy one-pager. Here's the language that actually ended up getting published in the catalog. Again, we're having to adjust some of this slightly with the numbering, which I can address later with the whole enhanced funding, short-term vocational versus emeritus focus. So as we look at non-credit, let's just check on my time here. I know we're kind of getting close. Non-credit, it's limited to 10 available areas. They're very, very specific. Again, one of those areas is short-term voc. Another one is emeritus. Another one that I have at my campus, which I think will complement this, is adult ESL, English as a second language learning. And though when I'm submitting these, basically, I only had these two choices when looking at the non-credit option. I mentioned the enhanced funding with the focus being short-term vocational. And again, this regional data being needed to support that. Not just that we're going to help train students to go into a job, but the fact that there's a job available for that student to go into. We also have another thing, because I oversee a career education program at the college. We also have this regional consortium that is often involved when we're adding things to our programs, adding a certificate, adding a degree, those kind of things. For non-credit, that's not involved. It's basically just the data, and the state is hands-on looking at every submittal, the state chancellor's office, every submittal looking at that data. And then I mentioned emeritus again, basically supporting, these could be a yoga class, a theater class, a music class, a beekeeping class, if the content is written showing how it benefits older student population. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes with emeritus classes if you can show it, which no doubt we can do with beekeeping. Here's some of the data and where we actually ran into some hiccups after the fact. So, looking at this kind of after acceptance and after approval and all this stuff, we did have some challenges with finding data locally. So I'm not going to read this, but basically it talks about agriculture. The coding for this state is kind of broad, and we saw it a little bit with those minimum quals. It's not just beekeeping, it's agriculture. And then it talks about aquaculture, animals, and farm workers in general, ranch, kind of broad, right? So it's really hard to get beekeeping specific data from the state. And then specifically in Orange County, this data was very small. We just don't have the agriculture here, right? I assume, Central or Northern California would be a lot more productive finding data. Funding, the community college model of funding was an interesting conversation to have when we're partnering and collaborating with universities and with people that maybe teach privately, but not as part of a larger system. So the community college model of funding basically is you get paid for what you teach. And so my salary is based on my class load. And whenever there's something outside of that that's needed, there's approval. And some of these things might be release time, where instead of teaching a 3-unit class, I'm allowed 3 units of release, quote unquote, that allows me to do other things. This is less typical, maybe reserved for like a chair type role or a coordinator type role. There are special projects and grants, but oftentimes those have also a timeline involved, can be a lengthy timeline. Even local grants can be a challenge to get because of the bureaucracy that's involved. So what ended up happening, just to bring this kind of back home, is that for me, there was no way I was going to get paid to do this from the college up front without showing an actual need of students. And so for me, it ended up being more like service hours. And so as part of my contract, I'm required to have college service or service hours as my responsibility. And so I was able to use those to try to help build this curriculum. Now, I spent way more hours than I'm required to under these service hours, right? But I know everybody here understands what that looks like. Spending more time than you actually get paid for. There are some career education and workforce grants, which I was hopeful for. However, this shift with the data and having low data for my region, this might be a challenge moving forward. There are some federal, and I know Wendy, you and I discussed, and with our our SoCal B school that we've discussed, potential federal funding available. But there's limitations there too, of course, and obviously there needs to be somebody professional that knows what they're doing, a grant writer, which we know if it's available is also very expensive. I think the one grant we looked at was like 500 grand, but the grant writing, in my circumstance, it was the district, and involving a grant writer, I think the only potential went from 500 to like 320, 330 or something, but we never quite got to that step in this small window of time. Again, I mentioned it's not typical to fund a new program on its potential. So you have to show that need for the students first. Hiring, again, having great connection with great teachers through the camp program. This wasn't so much of a challenge, but there are local processes to follow and timelines. Again, I'm hiring a beekeeping teacher, but it's under the biology department. So how do we work that out? I have to involve that chair and that dean. If we're hiring that teacher, what classes and what that scheduling looks like. When do we launch it? Again, coming back to the minimum qualifications, are all those met? I'll go over these next two slides really quick, so I know we're out of time. Just a couple notes on the apiary location. Local laws for beekeeping. This could be city, this could be county. I realized personally in the last year that my county and my state might say, yes, you can have bees, and I might actually even be registered with the state and registered with the county, but then there could be a code enforcement concern that might come into play, which might still not allow you to have bees. This is not a clear-cut thing. There are certain laws in some cities that actually will allow education purposes specifically to also not have to follow the code and the laws. So it's a moving target in some ways. Also, the idea of being accessible for disabled students is a huge deal. In the community colleges, basically anything where the student is going to be is considered a teaching area. Very specific requirements that have to be met. What the slope is of the walk to approach the teaching area, again, which could be the apiary. Is it paved? Is DG good enough or not? How far away is the closest restroom? How far away is the closest water source? Which we know, practically speaking, we need that stuff, right? But this is the law saying that we have other restrictions, other things that we have to follow. So much so that what's the closest building to that new teaching area? Well, that closest building has to completely apply with all these rules to comply. And if it wasn't recently approved, like in the last 3 years, chances are those requirements have changed. And so you have potential construction coming up, not even on the apiary itself, but on the closest building potentially. There's a lot of factors that come into play. Again, this is why for us, even if we could dream up the perfect size and design and enclosure, it made sense most to try to partner with a local apiary, which has to meet all those requirements, but at least it's already built and it's standing there already. So these were just two different locations that we pitched. The left one being on campus in, ironically, called the Bees Garden, which stands for biology and ecology, not for actual living bees, which people come to campus looking for bees actually, and they'll go here because this is a Google map indicator right there, right? Irvine Valley College Bees Garden. And so we're like, hey, can we actually get bees in the Bees Garden? Because of its proximity to some sports areas and to the parking lot, you can see right there, there was some concern about the closeness to people and regular traffic. And so we're looking at this newer area that the district owns that is starting to be built out. I still have hope for this area on the right, but it's just so early. And then as far as design goes, I worked up several different models, but had kind of worked up a cool design for an enclosure area, which is lockable, keep the bees safe, keep the people safe, forcing the bees up and out to forage. Marketing is a big one. Coming from business, I understand marketing is kind of more from start to finish. What usually people think about as the word marketing is usually advertising or promotion. And so when I talk marketing, I'm like, how do we build this thing so we can sell it to the public? How do we inform the public? How do we help the public through the process to sign up for these? Different colleges have different resources. At my college, the word marketing is more of advertising and promotion. It's not the whole picture thing. And so I've had to do a lot of that work on my end, trying to formulate how is this communicated. And even if I have the perfect language and the perfect ideas, I was recently told, like, hey, can I have a landing page on the website so I can put this information out there so people can actually see it? And the answer was no. So I'm still working through this because sometimes, a quote unquote, a program and what that constitutes or what efforts or dollars are putting into supporting something that's, a couple of courses. More specifically, the language was, no, we can't support a website for individual courses, which I kind of get. But these aren't just individual courses, and that whole picture isn't necessarily understood. So utilizing maybe the campus resources, hopefully they're there, the local clubs. Again, this is a lot. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have something to communicate to people, right? I think I'll be able to jump this hurdle, but having the connection to clubs, having the connection to people in the industry, I think social media, local social media, I mentioned here, like Nextdoor is one. I've been able to connect to local beekeepers through that because I'll see people, selling honey or, posting pictures of their hives and that kind of thing. So I think although it's much more time consuming, those kind of personal connections that are more meaningful may end up being more impactful in the long run. I mentioned the survey feedback too. And timeline. I kind of covered this a little bit, but just to reiterate, about 1 year, could be more depending on the college, to get the courses approved and the state processes approved. Maybe a year or more to have an actual location or building of an apiary. If you're starting from scratch, I imagine that would probably be a couple years. Costs, this is very hard because up front, this has all been, college service or volunteer hours that have come into play here. But looking at the bigger picture, outside of the labor hours, you also have obviously apiary, woodenware, safety equipment, livestock. So down the line, right, being able to budget for that, there's a lot of pieces involved there. And so I don't have a dollar amount for that, what it would actually cost to get up and running. Hence the research done on grants and those kind of things that I mentioned. Hours, I had to guess. The only thing I could really tie this back to, if we had to tie back hours to dollars though, if I have one unit or one LHE, which is kind of how my salary is based, or how the teaching assignments are based, I should say, one of those basically equates to 33 hours in a semester, about 2 hours a week of work. And so if we're doing a rough calculation, we could kind of tie that back to dollars based on salary rates and semester teaching loads, that kind of thing. And then also for part-time teachers who would be teaching the classes potentially. I mentioned that right picture we just saw of potential areas for an apiary, a future apiary. Of course, the idea is, and I know Wendy does this with me. It's like, wait, if we do this, and then, oh my gosh, we could do that, and then we could do that, and the collaboration could be amazing. Because once you have that established area and space, I mean, there's so many complementary programs that could come into play here. And so these were just a couple that came off the top of my head, and how they connect to the UC program too, at the different levels of extension that are there. So anyhow, I'm going to continue the groundwork on this and do what I can to collaborate and see if I can get some space. But it would be pretty amazing to have, this type of education available for our local area. I hope it's not just timely. I hope that this can actually sustain, even though it's kind of cool right now, the urban farming and the kind of more connection to land we've seen in the last several years. but hopefully it'll continue on. And our roots are there too, especially in Orange County. So much farming used to be here. A little bit more about me, some contact information. I'm happy to be a resource for anybody else looking to do this, and to answer any questions that came up from the presentation.
Terrific. Thank you so much for your presentation, Rick. And on behalf of Alina, Kiana, myself, we proudly offer you this California Master Beekeeper Program
Thank you so much.
designation. Yeah, thank you.
It's been great